Too Much Information is a production of iHeart Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Much Information, the show that brings you the secret histories and little-known fascinating facts and figures behind your favorite movies, music, TV shows, and more. We are your two Mogwais of minutia. I'm Alex Heigl.
I'm Jordan Runtagh, and I'm looking forward to you explaining to me what that means.
Well, Jordan, today we're talking about one of my favorite Christmas movies, a delightfully nasty little creature feature that came out of some of the greatest movie-making minds of our time. That's right, we're talking about 1984's Gremlins. I love both of these films. The first one is a tight, pretty mean little action adventure, and the second one is one of the best meta commentaries on Hollywood and just a hilarious example of what I call later blank check movie making. And they've got some of the best weird little guys of all time. You don't look at Gizmo and not fall in love with them. And then the Gremlins are equally cool. I have one sitting on my desk. I have the brain gremlin.
I didn't know that.
Not a full-size one, like a little 6-inch guy. But yeah, just the creature design is amazing. You know how much I love movie magic. So we're going to talk a lot about Chris Walas's work. And then Phoebe Cates, dude.
This is true.
Perfect Phoebe Cates. Delivering one of the greatest monologues in movie history. I'm guessing this is not on your radar.
No, I know next to nothing about this, but every time it's come up over the course of this series, I think when we talked about the movies of Chris Columbus, The Goonies, and Home Alone, you just got so excited and it was so heartwarming to me that I'm just so thrilled to dive into this. But you're right, I'm not a creatures guy. I'm not really a fantasy guy. Even stuff like E.T. and Labyrinth kind of push it for me. But I am just so excited for you to do what you do best, which is to teach me, and by extension, our dear listeners, all about the making of this movie that you love so well. And tell me what it is about it that touches you so deeply.
I love Joe Dante. Like Tim Burton, he's one of those guys that just has this endless love for a certain mid-century era and aesthetic, but his is so much more goofy and widescreen. He's taken influence from Looney Tunes all the way through to the William Castle stuff in the 50s because he was a Roger Corman guy. So he was really directly connected to that entire era of filmmaking, but he also brings all this other stuff into it. He loved comic books and Looney Tunes.
What else did he do?
The Howling is what got him this picture. That was part of the Great Werewolf trifecta of 1984, along with American Werewolf in London, and I think I forget if it's called Wolfen or just Wolf, but there's a third one that also came out in, not 1984, I'm sorry, 82? I don't know, there were 3 werewolf movies that came out in that year. One was American Werewolf in London, one was The Howling, and then the third one, which is either called Wolf or Wolfen. And yeah, he also did a movie called Matinee, which is a little-known John Goodman starring film that is Dante's tribute to the William Castle, 50s gimmick stuff, and a little bit of Roger Corman as well. And that movie, someone mistakenly took me and a lady friend when we were 5 to go see this movie. And it terrified me. Not the tongue-in-cheek satire parts, but it's based off of a movie called Mant, which is about a man-ant, much like The Fly. But that's the movie.
It's like Mape.
Right. Yes, that is a movie within a movie. So the whole thing is this meta commentary, but the actual ant-man makeup and footage of ants that they put in this thing scared the shit out of me. And for a long time, I'd blocked it out of my memory. I didn't remember the title of the film, so I was endlessly Googling 50s giant Ant-Man movie and 50s ant movie, and I eventually found out that it was this movie Matinee. Anyway, that Gremlins and Gremlins 2 are just I don't know, man. I love Joe Dante. I love what he does with his resources and money when he was afforded them before Gremlins 2 put him in director jail. And, in a way, this movie is basically us as a partnership.
Oh, explain.
Well, it's a very sweet, as we get into it, Dante took much from It's a Wonderful Life. He's a big Frank Capra fan. And so you're the small town Christmassy sweetness at the heart of it. And I'm the awful monster goblin that mutates from that and wreaks havoc upon it.
I just want to observe that you were born shortly after Halloween, and I was born shortly before Christmas.
Yes,
so
exactly.
There you go. Okay, this is starting to make a lot of sense.
And I'm mean to you all the time. like the gremlins are to Gizmo. So, from the brand of beer the creatures may have gotten their name from, to the beloved children's author's near-death experience that contributed to their legend, to the endless trials of the film's SFX wizard, and the absolutely batshit blank check sequel that came out 6 years after the fact, here's everything you didn't know about Gremlins. Let's start from the top. Although there isn't one exact consensus, most folklorists theorize that gremlin as a specific word came into popular usage in the era between WWI and WWII, the big one.
I just want to explicitly state, because we've referenced this gag many times over the last few episodes, this is an All in the Family reference, because Archie Bunker would always state that he fought in, say it with me now, WW2, the big one, which I just always thought was so funny because it inherently discounts all their vets of all other wars, which I think is really funny and very Archie Bunker. I'm really glad, by the way, that you put this section in here about the etymology of the word gremlins. Thank you for that.
Oh, it's so fascinating. Yeah.
It is.
So the word itself is, and this is stuff that I'm triangulating from a few different online dictionaries and etymology sites. Some people have tied it to an Old English word, gremian, which means to vex. There's an Irish Gaelic word, which I'm certainly pronouncing wrong, called graimin, for bad-tempered little fellow. And then a writer named Carol Rose, in a book called Spirits, Fairies, Leprechauns, and Goblins, an encyclopedia, she attributes the name to a portmanteau of Grimm's fairy tales and Fremlin beer. Follow me here. Fremlin was the most commonly available brand of beer in the British Royal Air Force mess halls of India and the Middle East in the 1920s. We're going to get into the Air Force thing in a minute. But I don't agree with the Grimm's fairy tale part, because it seems like an easier portmanteau to imagine goblin and Fremlin becoming gremlin. But, she wrote a book and I didn't. The term actually didn't specifically even mean horrible little mischief monster at first. From what I've been able to trace, it was actually started as a semi-pejorative term for younger, more inexperienced technicians and Air Force men, like basically junior Air Force employees. The OED, Oxford English Dictionary, puts the first usage of the word recorded in 1929, and you'll love this, in a poem published in the magazine Aeroplane that goes thusly. There is a class aboard, loathed by all the high and mighty, slaves who work and get but little thanks for all their labor. Yet they are both skilled and many men with many talents. They are but a herd of gremlins who do all the flying, gremlins who do much instruction, work shunned by the wing commanders. Terrible poem. Doesn't even rhyme.
I'm going to snap for it. I wish I had bongos right now to
yeah, exactly.
do the Maynard G. Krebs thing.
It's like the so I married an axe murderer. Woman. Whoa, man.
I mean, this is really interesting to me, and I think you're going to touch on this more later, but I always associate the term gremlin with one of two things, either little monsters or a problem in aircraft, some kind of technological thing, usually aircraft.
Yeah, you're going to read that in a few seconds.
Oh, great. Okay.
So what I find most funny is that there's proto-surfer and skateboarding slang that also records this. The gremlin or gremmy has been variously described as surf culture slang for either under-talented younger newbie surfers or unwelcome beachgoers, hangers-on to the surfing community. And then OED has another reference to it being used in skateboarding, which isn't a surprise because skateboarding came from surfing culture. But it's so bizarre to me to think that the two roots of this word linguistically are from the Air Force and maybe surfing. I'm sure they got it from the Air Force, but anyway, Jordan, tell us about the Air Forcical origins of the word.
I'm still stuck on all the surf stuff because all my Beach Boys knowledge, I've never really heard that word come up.
Gremmy? Yeah, neither had I. It just popped up in the Oxford English Dictionary for starters, so who am I to quibble?
Well, the term gremlins spread wider during WW2, the big one. In 1941, Newsday mentioned them, gremlins, as exasperating pixies, which is a great Pixies cover band name.
Yeah.
And at least one person suggested that the British tradition of blaming malfunctions on gremlins may have helped the RAF get through the German offensive against Britain. Author and historian Marlon Bressi is quoted as saying, "Morale among the RAF pilots would have suffered if they pointed the finger of blame at each other. It was far better to make the scapegoat a fantastic and comical creature than another member of your own squadron." That's very British.
Right.
There was even a series of posters urging common sense caution for troops in RAF starring goblins. I want to Google that.
Oh, it's in the Wikipedia page. They're amazing. They're like those beautiful old illustrated like propaganda posters, but it's all stuff for like, remember to wipe up your grease or the gremlins will come for you. Like just like,
well, do they
little,
have pictures of creatures?
Yeah, and they
I'm picturing like the absinthe fairy.
Dude, they look like Gazoo, basically. Yeah, if you look up the actual disambiguation page on Wikipedia page, yeah, they look like they're like sort of depicted as little like clown men, but it's like gremlins think it's fun to hurt you. Use care always. Back up our battle skies. These like beautiful old 4-color poster illustrations.
Oh my God, you're right. Yeah,
Gremlins are floor greasers. Watch your step. Gremlins love to pitch things at your eyes. Wear safety goggles. Gremlins will push you around. Look where you're going.
It looks like a not very like an overtly unintelligent Humpty Dumpty on Ozempic.
There's also a really funny picture of a bomber with the nose art of a gremlin, and he looks just like the Noid who ruins pizza famously.
Oh my God, he does.
Yeah. Right? So, yeah, I mean, it's amazing that in popular consciousness, they've become these scaly, horrifying little scamps that, like, when they were just pictured as, like, sort of dumb, malicious elves.
You're right. Yeah, it looks like somebody who got fired from the Keebler factory.
Like, you should just keep riffing on this, man. This is all gold.
It's our sequel for Gremlins 3. There are also folklorists and historians who posit that the invention of gremlins was a manifestation of anxiety around the new modern age of warfare rapidly encroaching. So this was like a manifestation of fear of the atomic bomb. That's heavy.
Or like the automization of war, basically, which people really talk about. Like, you know, World War I was like, I don't know, doing some rough math, like, let's just say a couple of decades after the Civil War, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so the Civil War, like,
50,
you know, this is when they were still lining up to take pot shots at each other. So the all the different stuff coming out of World War I, like tanks, you know, rapid fire machine guns, mustard gas, this was all just like horrifying new death technology that people were just like unequipped to even comprehend, much less forced to witness it.
And I'm not even trying to be funny right now, although I think this is literally an Onion Our Dumb Century headline. It's like not very sportsmanlike.
Oh, true.
There were certain like codes of battle. I mean, as you mentioned, it's hilarious how you would like the two sides would line up like it was like a Red Rover game.
Announce to each other that they were there. Just like start shooting. Yeah. So gremlins are possibly a psychic manifestation of that.
You know, in a way, aren't we all a psychic manifestation of anxiety? The real psychic manifestation of anxiety were the friends we made along the way. Emily Zarka, the host of Monstrum on the PBS Stories channel, told Atlas Obscura the first military airplane was invented in 1909, which was like 6 years after the Wright brothers took flight. Wow, we got on that quick.
Oh, we sure did.
We can kill people with it. If we can find out a way to kill people with some new technology, we will find it.
If we couldn't have sex with it, we'd make it into a weapon of war. Human nature.
God. Flying is a really complex process, she continued, let alone under the stress of war. I think that in a lot of ways might have been easier, not even just to explain away the mechanics, but to explain away human error, gremlins. It would be hard to take responsibility for the death of another pilot in your group. So a gremlin is the blank in the gun of executioners.
Yes, exactly. I mean, henceforth, I'm blaming everything that goes wrong with this show on gremlins. So,
I mean, the British do.
Exactly.
Except Prince Andrew. I don't think Gremlins did that.
I wonder if it'd hold up in court.
Beloved children's author Roald Dahl is credited with bringing Gremlins outside the Royal Air Force. I didn't know this. He was a member of the 80th Squadron of the RAF, and in September of 1940, he was ordered to fly his biplane in stages to the squadron's forward airstrip south of Mersa Model in Egypt. I don't know what half of those words mean. Biplane in stages. Oh, wait, like he had to fly pieces of his plane? Like
No. He had to fly in stages.
Oh, and make different stops. Okay. On the final leg of this trip, Roald Dahl couldn't find an airstrip, and running low on fuel, he attempted a crash landing in the desert. In the ensuing crash, Dahl's skull was fractured, his nose smashed, and he was temporarily blinded. He managed to get safely away from the wreckage, but passed out, although he was eventually rescued. He didn't recover his sight for another 6 weeks, and then to add insult to injury, an RAF inquiry into the crash revealed that the location he'd been sent to was completely incorrect, and he actually crashed in a no man's land between the Allied and Italian forces. So, in a way, that could have got a lot worse, I guess.
I mean, yeah, it's just imagine that, like, I don't know what the timing of this was, but imagine the accident that cost you your sight for 6 weeks and fractured your skull was like a complete up by someone of your commanding officers who were like, we basically flew you into nowhere. Sorry.
Right. But also imagine being blind and crippled in no man's land. Like the odds of wandering into the opposing camp is pretty high also. See, this is the good gremlin, bad gremlin.
Yeah, the yin and yang.
Yeah. In January 1942, Dahl was transferred to Washington, D.C. as assistant air attaché at the British Embassy. I would assume a cush job to apologize for the screw-up that nearly killed him.
Right.
And it was while in D.C. that he proceeded to write his first children's novel, The Gremlins, which I'm not familiar with, and I had no idea that he had this big a role in popularizing this term. He showed his finished manuscript to Sidney Bernstein, the head of the British Information Service, who came up with the idea to send it to Walt Disney, which they did in July 1942. Disney eventually purchased the rights from Dahl for an animated feature, and the story was published variously in Cosmopolitan in between sex tip quizzes, I guess.
I don't think they were more of a lit mag at that point, but
and also as a picture book by Random House in late 1942 and early 1943. Eleanor Roosevelt read The Gremlins to her grandkids, and the book sold 30,000 copies.
Well, they printed like 5,000 as an initial run, and Dahl bought 50 copies for himself and passed it out almost anywhere he could. But what an insane 20th century confluence of things. Disney, Eleanor Roosevelt, Gremlins,
Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory by extension.
Yeah.
The Axis powers.
Yeah.
That is wild. Unfortunately, its reach was hindered by wartime paper shortages, but still, Roald Dahl, the book, and the film project became known quantities in Hollywood, even earning a mention in famed industry columnist Hedda Hopper's work. My favorite thing about Roald Dahl was that he wrote the script to my favorite James Bond movie, He Only Lived Twice, Sean Connery movie. Which is funny because then Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond novels, wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, which reads like a Roald Dahl book. I always thought it was. Isn't that weird? It's almost like they lost a bet and we're like, all right, I'll try to write like you.
That's an amazing posit. Yeah.
Sadly, the Gremlin film project was whittled down to an animated short as opposed to a full feature, and then canceled by Disney entirely in August 1943, when copyright issues between the RAF and Disney proved insurmountable. I would assume the RAF had copyrighted the figure for the propaganda posters.
No, I don't actually, this one of the sources that I read made reference to Statute 12, and I tried to look that up, and the closest I can find is something having to do with the RAF not holding pilots liable for damage to aircrafts, but I assume it has to do with just details of the planes and stuff that they were not able to square with, the British Armed Forces. What an unstoppable force, immovable object situation. Walt Disney versus the RAF.
I mean, my money's on Disney. I mean, no offense, John, but
yeah.
But the Gremlins eventually moved to another medium where Walt Disney's Comics and Stories outlet published the original story, and then another 9-episode series starring its chief gremlin, Gus, with the bulk of the latter drawn by comics legend Walt Kelly. Who's Walt Kelly?
He was was a Disney guy, and then he left them and started this comic called Pogo, which was like actually an enormously successful and influential comic, kind of like of the era of like Fritz the Cat and stuff. But Pogo, it was wild for its sprawl. Like there would be all these like themes of philosophy and, you know, political commentary. And Alan Moore, you know, who wrote, you know, V for Vendetta and Watchmen, was a huge fan of Pogo. So if that gives you any idea of the kind of guy who liked it, imagine how batshit it was at the time.
It looks like it's a cross between Calvin and Hobbes and like R. Crumb.
Yeah, that probably sums it up pretty well.
But Gremlins proved durable for a while. In 1943, Bugs Bunny battled the gremlin in the Murray Melodies short Falling Hair, and again in 1944's Russian Rhapsody, which this time depicted Russian gremlins sabotaging an aircraft piloted by Adolf Hitler.
Incredible.
And then, of course, there's the famous Twilight Zone episode, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which pitted a young Bill Shatner against the gremlin that only he can see.
Have you ever seen that original one?
You know what? I don't know if I've ever seen it start to finish. I've seen the clip of him, you know, looking out the window, but...
And then it was The Simpsons. That I saw it first in the Simpsons Treehouse of Horror episode where they parody it. But it's the design they went with it is bizarre. It's like a ape-like creature with like a sort of pig dog face. It just looks weird.
Yeah, I think I've only seen it like at an angle. It's pretty creepy looking. Written by famed horror author Richard Matheson, who also wrote I Am Legend, the episode was later remade for the Twilight Zone movie with Shatner's part played by John Lithgow, which came out just a year before the subject of this episode. Do we give our obligatory reference to the Twilight Zone movie tragedy?
Yeah, Twilight Zone the movie pops up a lot in this because Joe Dante worked on a segment of it. Oh. You know, it was John Landis was involved and he killed some kids. Just like the way I offhandedly threw that off. No, it is famous, even though it was really a star-studded production. It was all of these like youngish Hollywood brats taking a stab at the stuff that they were influenced by. But it is most famous for the segment John Landis was responsible for, where, two kids and a stunt guy died in a helicopter crash based on like lax safety regulations or lax filmmaking that he should have been put in director jail for and was not. And I think like when pressed was remarkably cavalier, bordering on callous about the entire thing. But his kid sucks too, so not really a surprise.
Did they film it like somewhere? Because it was like done on location, and they like, didn't they just get the kids by like going out in the street and being like, "Hey, want to be in a movie?"
Yeah, It
was bad. It was real bad.
Oh yes, so Vic Morrow, who was an Emmy-winning actor, was killed in a helicopter crash with two illegally hired child actors.
That was it.
Yeah.
Where did they film it?
And this led to a bunch of new safety procedures and stuff implemented in the filmmaking industry. Basically, the guy was shooting. It was like a war sequence, and the guy piloting the helicopter was like having trouble navigating the detonations that they were shooting into the air from the ground by the pyrotechnic guy, and that caused this helicopter crash.
Damn.
He was acquitted. But yeah, why do I think he was like sort of cavalier about it? Anyway, I don't know. We talked about this enough. It'll come back. Despite being a film that features one of its main characters reciting the details of her father's horrifying death and the murder of a senior citizen, Gremlins has its origins with one of the most family-friendly writers of the past 50 years, Christopher Columbus. Columbus basically wrote the original script for this as a writing exercise. He never intended it for it to actually get made. He told Cut Print Film in 2016, "I got the idea from an apartment I used to live in. What sounded like a platoon of mice would come out, and to hear them skittering around in the blackness was really creepy." And his script was legendarily far darker than the finished film. Gizmo actually transforms into the main gremlin, Stripe, rather than birthing him. I hate using that verb. And it also features a scene in which the character Billy comes down the stairs and his mother's decapitated head is bounced at him. Columbus had come to Steven Spielberg's eye with a short film that he made at NYU called I Think I'm Gonna Like It Here. And this was like, I think he was like 22 or 23. Like, he just sent this script out via his agent, and it went out to like 40 people, and Spielberg grabbed it from like the submissions pile in his office and liked it. He didn't like it enough to direct it because he had just wrapped the puppet-heavy E.T. and was now working on Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which featured a lot of heavy special effects. But he offered Chris Columbus a chance to come out to L.A. and develop the script with him at Amblin. They toned it down, and Spielberg actually came up with the idea of making Gizmo a separate creature from the Gremlins. He birthed them instead of becoming one of them. Gotta stop saying that. And this was partially done at the script stage, but also they like tweaked a bunch of stuff right before production, both the design of Gizmo, and Spielberg was like, yeah, he should do all the heroic stuff at the end. And they actually took it away from Zach Galligan, who was like, I got to be the hero in this, like my first film. And Spielberg came in like, I don't know, weeks before they were supposed to start shooting and was like, Puppet's going to do it. Incidentally, Mogwai means devil or demon in Cantonese, and Mandarin, it's pronounced Mogwai. I don't know why I gave that a French accent. I'm not good with languages.
Yeah, you're great with languages. What are you talking about?
Joe Dante told Empire in 2022, originally Gizmo was meant to be in the movie for the first couple of reels before turning into Stripe, the bad gremlin. And about 6 weeks away from the shoot, Steven Spielberg had this brilliant idea, and it was a brilliant idea, to make him the sidekick. We built a giant Gizmo head and got lots of close-ups, and he became the de facto star of the movie. We even reshot the ending, much to Zach Galligan's chagrin. Dante had met Spielberg under much less auspicious circumstances than NYU. It was when Universal filed suit against Roger Corman, who, as I mentioned earlier, Joe Dante came up under. And this was over the Corman-produced, Dante-directed film Piranha. Universal sued him based on its similarities to Jaws, but in an immense display of chillness, Steven Spielberg basically was like, you know what, we're going to get ripped off a lot, and this is the best made ripoff I've seen. So he convinced Universal to back down. And he was impressed enough by Dante's direction on Piranha that he gave him a slot in the Twilight Zone movie. And based on The Howling in the aforementioned werewolf year, he offered Dante Gremlins. And the timing of this was incredible because Dante supposedly was down to his last $100 and like so depressed about his prospects in Hollywood that when Spielberg's offer for it arrived in the mail, he assumed it had been sent to the wrong address.
Oh.
Funny, this is equally amazing and puts a totally different film into an alternate timeline. Spielberg actually wanted Tim Burton to direct this because Tim Burton had been coming out of Cal Arts and like had been actually working for Disney, and he'd produced Frankenweenie, which is his like black and white thing about the kid who Frankenstein's his dog. But he just didn't think that Tim Burton ultimately had enough experience to helm a feature film. And then Tim Burton promptly proved him incorrect when Pee-wee's Big Adventure came out not a long time later. But man, imagine a Tim Burton directed Gremlins. Everyone just do that. Dutch angles, German expressionism, a fucking Danny Elfman soundtrack.
But didn't you kind of say the Jerry Goldsmith song was like kind of oompa?
Actually, yeah, the Jerry Goldsmith theme from this movie, one of the two famous ones aside from Gizmo's Lullaby, sounds remarkably like some of Danny Elfman's oompa oompa bullshit.
Maybe that was a dig. Maybe that was like when Tim Burton first started working with Danny Elfman. It was like, all right, we gotta.
I'm going to make the rest of my career sound like the Gremlins theme.
The movie you took from me. I will say these two Spielberg stories with Dante and Chris Columbus are very cool. Like he's showing that he's cool in a way that I did not readily expect.
Yeah, this gave me a whole new level of respect for him. Just the degree to which he was like, he like recognized a little bit of himself, like the same kind of gee whiz 1940s and 50s, loves movies, loved pop culture stuff, and just like went to bat with him throughout this entire shoot, which you will now read.
I'm sure I've told you this, but I had a family member who semi-casually knew Steven Spielberg and was in his office a bunch on the Universal lot. And apparently he had like a table with like all of his special things on it and his awards. And he would have his Oscar next to like his like Boy Scout Pinewood Derby trophy and stuff like that. Just like it all was like equal in him. Like these are my special things. I know.
Adorable.
I know. I really like that. Gremlins would be the first original picture from Spielberg's new Amblin imprint, and Joe Dante told Cut Print Film that the studio was unconvinced that this was a great idea for a movie. They did it to make Steven Spielberg happy, mainly. But the arrangement actually worked out fine. Since Spielberg was busy shooting Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, he wasn't available to be as hands-on, or, as you put in parentheses, interfering, as he was with Tobe Hooper on the set of Poltergeist, which was a movie that he basically shadow directed, ghost directed.
Yeah, I mean, this has been like an ongoing controversy for decades. Mick Garris, who is like a horror guy from the industry, he directed a film called Sleepwalkers, and he's just been, I think he has other stuff that doesn't come to mind, but he has like a very famous horror podcast that he runs. And he conclusively was like, Tobe Hooper directed Poltergeist. But it was such a controversy at the time where everyone was like accusing Spielberg of basically leaning over Tobe Hooper's shoulder the entire time and telling him how to move the camera and telling him how to do stuff, that Spielberg was moved to take like a full page ad out in the trades that was like, Tobe Hooper directed this movie, not me. I am sorry. And then, like, yeah, it was crazy. People had less to do back then.
But because Spielberg was so hands-off for Poltergeist, Dante would basically use Steven Spielberg as a shield, asking him to tell the studio to back off whenever they had notes that he didn't agree with, which was nice. They won't mess with you, and you won't mess with me. This works out great.
Yeah. I mean, it was really an ideal situation. Joe Dante is an incredibly lucky director, actually, given the success of this, which could have been a huge disaster, and what he got to do with Gremlins 2, as we'll cover later.
Yeah, you mentioned this earlier, the whole like 1940s, 50s, golly gee whiz Americana stuff. Joe Dante stuffed Gremlins with nods to American pop culture. He studied Frank Capra and Jimmy Stewart's iconic It's a Wonderful Life for the wintry small-town vibe of the film. And there's more than one nod to him in this movie. The 1957 educational short shown in science class, Hemo the Magnificent, was written and directed by Capra.
That's nuts. What an insane deep cut, dude. To find a Capra-directed educational short and sneak it into your movie as a nod to him?
That's pretty great.
Come on.
And It's a Wonderful Life, the movie, appears literally depicted on TV, as does Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Plus, Gremlins is packed with tributes to everything from Flashdance to Looney Tunes and even Spielberg himself. The titles on the movie theater marquee are A Boy's Life and Watch the Skies, the respective shooting titles for E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And Spielberg also had a tiny cameo in Gremlins. What was he?
He's in a wheelchair when Billy's dad calls him from the expo that he's presenting at.
If we had more time, I would do a quick sidebar on Hitchcockian director cameos.
Yeah. But we don't.
We don't. Sorry. James Cameron is a third-class passenger boarding the Titanic at the beginning of the movie in Titanic. There, sorry, I had to. It's like Cartman. He can't start singing Come Sail Away. He has to finish it. Yeah.
I'm sailing. Damn it.
The Gremlin jokes inserted into the movie Gremlin weren't even limited to pop culture. They snuck an AMC Gremlin car into the Chinatown scene, depicted with its hood up and smoke pouring out of its engine. Because I think it was kind of a piece of garbage, if I recall.
Yeah, right. That was the bit about that car.
That was the bit. Funnily enough, one of the most repeated trivia bits about Gremlins is that the set used for the film's Kingston Falls, which is Universal's town square set on Universal's backlot, was reused just a year later for Back to the Future's Mill Valley, a place that I used to wander around quite a bit as a kid when I used to roam the backlots as a little boy. And Back to the Future was my favorite movie. So I used to go to the Clock Tower Square and pretend I was Marty McFly. It was great. I also went to the Bates Motel too, which is weird because you would go inside and one of the rooms actually had a shower with like dried fake blood in it. And I don't know if they just kept it that way for like people who would visit, but I didn't know that. And I got really creeped out. Really creeped out.
Yeah, I mean, I think wasn't it chocolate syrup famously?
Yeah, but this was right after Gus Van Sant did the shot for shot remake, which they also shot on there. So part of me was like, wait, is this from this? But I think it was just for people who were visiting to get a kick out of it. Anyway. Gremlins had originally intended to film elsewhere to cut costs. They wanted to use the so-called Dukes of Hazzard Street on the Warner Brothers lot, but scheduling delays forced them to move to the more expensive Universal Town Square for these sequences of the film. But even shooting on a backlot didn't guarantee peace of mind. About a week before shooting started, another production company began setting up in the area immediately behind the Universal Town Square lot. Cinematographer John Hora told the American Society of Cinematographers magazine, "Suddenly, they began erecting all these giant poles and tarps and other paraphernalia right behind our buildings. And you posit this may have actually been the production of Back to the Future because the timeline works out.
Release-wise, I don't know the shooting schedule of Back to the Future. I could have easily looked that up, and I didn't. The Onion regrets the error.
You also posit that if it wasn't Back to the Future, it might have been Walter Hill's Streets of Fire, which is...
Yeah, in the Blu-ray commentary, they said that was shooting at the same time. So those are the two culprits that f***ed up the Gremlin shoot.
We got to do Back to the Future one of these days. Our buddies Jay and Allie really want us to do that.
I'll just let you do that as an unbroken monologue.
Oh, come on.
Like the Iceman Cometh or something. We'll like rent out a theater and you can just read the entire 45 pages. I'm sure you'll write alone. And I'll applaud you at the end like Orson Welles and Citizen Kane.
I mean, it's 70 pages on Titanic, so I think that...
yeah, Jesus,
I could
like 150. Just pitch the fucking book, dude.
Cinematographer John Hora said that these sets were so high up that they couldn't shoot the tops of buildings for Gremlins, and one of the film's matte paintings even had to incorporate the other set's cables into the illustration. It was a nightmare, he concluded. Not only did we have to be careful where we shot, but while we were setting up, there was continuous construction noise, pile drivers, hammers, shouting. The only quiet moments we had were when we were shooting. The majority of interiors were shot on Warner Brothers sound stages at the Burbank Studios. The non-specific Chinatown where we first meet Gizmo was shot on the Burbank Studios Tenement Street, which you posit is possibly racist. I'm going to say yes.
Against the Chinese or the Irish, you literally call something Tenement Street, like a shorthand reference to like the most dehumanizing housing situation of all time.
Or anti-Semitic. I mean, it's pretty, anyone who's not, or anti-Italian. There's really like lots of people lived in
just
tenements.
Take your pick.
Yeah.
So just anti-poor.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. It's more classist than racist, I guess. Originally, this was supposed to have taken place in Hong Kong until someone pointed out it might be hard to get Gizmo through customs.
And that's the one thing they decided to make realistic about it.
I was going to say, I love when logic rears its head very selectively in these things.
As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages. And now we are on to the true stars of this movie and its MVP, the puppets, and the man who made them possible. SFX legend Chris Walas, I believe it is pronounced. He would go on to win an Oscar for still some of the most horrific imagery I've ever seen in my life. The Jeff Goldblum falls apart or turns into a fly cancer monster in David Cronenberg's The Fly. Walas, you might remember, for those of you with an encyclopedic memory and a love of this show, he previously appeared in TMI when we did Raiders of the Lost Ark because he was the guy who designed the melting Nazis at the end.
Oh, yeah.
And he initially came onto Gremlins because he'd been working with Joe Dante and Dante's producer Michael Finnell, who is also a Roger Corman alum, on, I think, a 3D version of Creature from the Black Lagoon. And this is hilarious. That project was shelved in favor of Jaws 3D, one of the most famous cinematic nightmares of all time. But, you know, Walas still wanted to hang around with Finnell and Dante, narrator voice, and he would regret that choice. He told Empire, "I pulled the first draft of the Gremlins script the other day and read it, and I have no idea how I could be so stupid as to commit to that project. I'd written one word on the front cover. Ha! I didn't think it could be done. The technology didn't exist. I didn't have a shop or crew, but I was desperate for money." Columbus's script had included initial descriptions of both the Mogwai and the Gremlins. Walas recalled them as like armored things with big white spiked horns, but he wanted them to have a specific aesthetic callback to the Mogwai. He wanted them to be on a continuum of quote unquote evolution. So he gave them their, you know, the big bat ears. Just a great weird little guy design. Really all up there in the pantheon.
Looks like a Furby kind of.
Well, we'll get to that.
Oh.
But I mean the Gremlins as well. Because Spielberg endlessly meddled with the design of the Mogwai, as we'll talk. Walas told Cutprint Films that his initial inspiration for Gizmo was more simian, shall we say.
Apes.
Ape-like. After reading the script, my first idea was to take the tarsier, a little primate, and give it cartoony proportions. I wanted the big eyes to make it cute. I showed it to Mike Fennell and Joe Dante, and they asked for some tweaks, so I made the next one. This was more like a puppy. Fortunately, they didn't go with it. Those were the only two Mogwai I sculpted before the final one. And I mentioned that Steven would just like randomly call in from wherever he was shooting Temple of Doom and be like, make it have translucent like bat ears or like fox ears. And then later he was like, in the grand tradition of George Lucas basing Chewbacca on his own dog, Spielberg would call and say, yeah, can you make Gizmo match the color of my dog, Chauncey? Which I believe was a beagle.
Chauncey?
Yeah. And then once they had the designs, then they had to figure out how to animate these little bastards. Wayless told Fangoria, initially Joe Dante wanted the Mogwai to look very real. At one point, we even brought in a monkey to see if we might be able to put a monkey in a suit. Then we thought of getting little squirrels or some kind of rodent from some remote part of the world that wouldn't be immediately identifiable and do a little coloring on them.
Friend of the pod, monkeys in suits.
But the dog in the film was, I think, enough working with animals for Joe. And anyway, we decided to go with a full effects creature. Dante told Cut Print Films, we actually did get a monkey and put a head on him and watched him careen around the editing room, pooping on everything in tear. We decided it really wasn't going to work out. There are so many hilarious images of when people try to make animals as like a cost-cutting measure. There's one from Alien 3 where the alien hatches out of a dog. So they were going to try and make a whippet with like an exoskeleton and props around it. And there are like set photos of this thing. And it is, first of all, so cute with his little like alien like armor and tail. And second of all is just like, why? Why, guys? Why are you making me do this? Anyway, Wayless has said that Gremlins is his favorite thing that he's worked on, repeatedly, but he has also still said it was an enormous pain in the ass that nearly killed him, and most of that was Gizmo. He told StarWars.com, the small size of the Mogwai made it difficult to come up with mechanical puppets that would have enough features to keep the puppet alive on film. We just couldn't get away with the most standard puppet techniques at that small size, so most of the Mogwai were largely animatronic, as opposed to the Gremlins. The Gremlins were specifically designed to be hand puppets, and the majority of them were relatively simple puppets that were enjoyable to operate. There were lots of specialized puppets that only did one thing: crawl, skateboard, hang from lights, etc. We made a lot of puppets on that film. So many that an accurate guess at a number is not really feasible, especially since we cannibalized a lot of them to create new ones along the way. They made around 20 different gizmos for the film. Sometimes several were used in the same shot. This is insane to me. So he was carried by Billy, and that would be, I think they said, an RC controlled, like a radio frequency controlled puppet. And then Billy would the character would set him down. And in the intervening time, when the camera was panning downwards, Wayless would have to yank the other one, the one he was holding, out of frame in the intervening time before the camera reached the floor, where a different model piloted a different way had already been placed in the shot. Zach Galligan, who plays Billy, told Empire, if you look at the film, the camera almost never pans below my waist. That's because there were 12 people down there, duck walking around with joysticks, while cables ran up my body. I'd have to be smiling and having a fabulous time with this little furry thing while this contraption pinched my flesh. It's my favorite Zappa album, Contraption Pinched My Flesh. Deep cut reference there. Not even one of the most popular Zappa albums, Weasels Rip My Flesh.
Oh, I think it is.
Oh, okay. I stand corrected. Not a deep cut. By the time Gizmo started moving, it was incredible. He'd be so cute, I'd get the inclination to touch him. And the puppeteers were so good that he'd instantly react. That must have been a little insane making. Imagine showing up to work like a little altered and like you're like, the puppet is real. It's reacting to me. This is nuts to me. Like they designed, because they couldn't fit all the mechanisms in a smaller size puppet, they designed just what they called super faces, which were like foot wide, 3 feet with the ears.
Oh.
Intensely packed and intricately designed gizmo heads that had all of the motors and hydraulics necessary that you see in the intense close-ups. That's how they got his, like, you know, his eyebrows and cheek and all of his lips and the ear tips to move. That's a much larger puppet than the actual things were, just an extreme close-up. Wayless told Death by Films, we used all sorts of methods to operate the Mogwai and Gremlins. radio signals, rods, handwork, marionetting, cables, and what I call throw 'em across the room puppetry. Which could probably be best seen in the tavern scene where they are literally just rubber puppets being cast across the room. Spielberg's relatively last-minute decision to make Gizmo more heroic and central to the film's action necessitated his place in Billy's backpack for most of the second half of the film, because all the junk that they had to animate him with could be more easily hidden. And the crew hated Gizmo so much that they assembled a list titled "Horrible Things to Do to Gizmo." And the shot of him being strung up on a dartboard by the Gremlins was pulled from that list. Dante did tell Empire, though, the dog in the movie, Mushroom, thought Gizmo was real. We got reactions out of him that were just incredible. They actually started calling him like the cutaway dog, because whenever they were stuck for like a reaction shot, they were like, Mushroom would always have the most incredible face reactions. So they would just fill frames by cutting away to the dog.
Cigar chomping executive. Shoot the dog!
More dog in the picture.
That's not what I meant, but okay.
Gizmo cast quite a long shadow. Joe Dante recalled in an AMA on Reddit that when Furby fever was sweeping the nation in 1998, producer Mike Fennell and I noticed a certain similarity between Furby and the Mogwai and pointed it out to Warner Brothers. Soon, there was a Gizmo Furby for sale, and no doubt, some settlement money changed hands. He has also recently charged Disney with wholesale ripping off the Gizmo for the Baby Yoda.
Oh, wow. Oh, my God, yeah. Oh, I didn't even think about that. Despite the fact that there were a ton of gremlins, and some were literally just built to be, as you said, thrown across a room, Billy actor Zach Gallican recalled that security was extra tight around these puppets because they were such a substantial part of the budget. We're just like going to sell these puppets on the black market. Or I don't know. Maybe they would sell them to Disney. Who knows?
Supposedly these things were in the neighborhood of like $30,000 would go up to costing like $30,000 each between man hours and parts and everything.
But who would you sell them to? And it's not like whoever you sold them to could use them, because they'd be so identifiable in the movie as like, oh, that's the thing I built. Like
a thriving LA Skid Row marketplace, black marketplace of screen used gremlins.
Hey man, want to buy a puppet? Opens his trench coat.
Actually, those things are all over the prop community online.
True,
because they made so many, they're still being sold.
Cast and crew were asked by security to pop their trunks to make sure no puppets were being smuggled out. That's one of my favorite factoids we have ever read on this show. Wow.
Is that a Mogwai in your pants, or are you just happy to see me?
Better said in the cigar chomping executive voice. Creepier, but much more effective. Compounding any scene with a puppet was the fact that production didn't have the budget to build raised sets like they did for Muppets films or Who Framed Roger Rabbit. In other words, you could have the puppeteers beneath the floor where the human actors were to kind of, do the puppeteering. You know how puppets work.
Yes.
And if you don't, pause this show right now and Google it. Jim Spencer, the production designer, came up with the affordable answer. Wayless told DailyDead.com. He chose one of the Warner Brothers stages that had a pool in it and built the sets over the existing flooring there. That's smart. So the puppeteers had to go down into the cement flooring of the pool and work their way through the maze of floor supports. It wasn't the ideal situation, but it worked. The cement pond. See the Beverly Hillbillies, too.
Yeah, right.
The most complicated scenes in the film were the scene in which Phoebe Cates' character is being menaced, as you say, by gremlins in Dory's Tavern, along with the scene where the gremlins are in the theater watching Snow White, which, as you mentioned, and I can only imagine, necessitated some intense negotiation with Disney. Maybe that was why they felt entitled to snatch it for Baby Yoda.
Oh, yeah, sure.
We earned this. Wayless explained to Daily Dead that the bar scene was made even more complicated by the fact that director Joe Dante encouraged the crew to help brainstorm the action by way of a blank list he posted on set. They were big on lists on the set. We had to build a lot of special rigs, and there was even a rig built for 3 gremlins dancing against the wall that ended up not being used. Like Full Monty style? There were all kinds of gags we did in the bar that were cut from the film. I think the original bar scene ran 20 minutes long, and Joe cut it down to 10, so there's a lot of missing gremlins in there. I don't remember many specifics, as I was burnt to a cinder by that time in the production, but it was a week in the bar just shooting gremlin gags over and over again. In the bar scene, the lighted core sign on the wall was apparently a huge headache for camera and lighting crew, presumably because they didn't want to have free advertising in there. So they asked,
well, and it threw off the way they were lighting the shot. Yeah, in that ASC magazine article, what's his name? John Horace, would I think work on Gremlins 2 again. He talks about how they wanted the lighting for this to look like old EC Comics splash pages. So like that scene in the pool where it's like lit from below by green, but also like 4 different weird other light sources from the windows and all this stuff in the bar. They were trying to make it look like a comic and a cartoon, and this core sign was just throwing off all the lighting and always dead center in the shot.
They got around this by asking the guy supervising the shot when the gremlin flies off a ceiling fan if he could aim the prop at the light, and he successfully destroyed it in one shot. What a good problem solving in this.
Yeah.
Oh.
I just love
Movie
it.
magic.
Wayless will, I mean, yeah, we're going to talk about the personal hell that this was for Chris Wayless, but like, doesn't it sound fun to like whip a puppet off a ceiling fan and smash a bar sign? Like, come on.
That was the problem to solve that day.
He was seriously put through the ringer, though, by this, because after principal photography wrapped, there were another 3 months of puppet filming for shots that didn't require any humans to be in the frame. I'd barely survived the main production, he told Empire, and this was literally just one puppet shot after another. At best, I averaged 3 hours of sleep per night. It was just a very hectic, panicked endurance test. He got a kidney stone and literally fell off a truck at one point during this marathon, injuring his ankle and forcing him onto crutches. The voices of Gizmo and the Gremlins were made of a fairly talented cast of dudes. Howie Mandel gets a lot of credit for the voice of Gizmo, but he's annoying, and his Gizmo voice is essentially just the one he used for Bobby's World, so f*** him. Most of the film was actually shot with the Gremlins and Gizmo silent. Wayless's crew would make little noises and voices when they were working with the puppets, so they actually got to record a guide track. They brought all the crew into the studio and had them record like a guide track for the actual voice actors. And then Wayless was really hurt when he went to see the movie and discovered that all of those noises had been replaced with animal sounds. So they went back and did it again. Other voice actors included Michael Winslow, forever known as the Police Academy funny mouth sounds guy, and friend of the pod, legendary voiceover artist Frank Welker. Welker actually got Mandel the job, the suckier of the 2 men revealed. Frank set up this interview for me and I went in. Mandel, who sucks, told Cut Print Film. It was a building that also housed a gynecologist's office. So when I approached that sign and heard noises coming out, I thought, oh my God, I have no idea what procedure this doctor could possibly be doing. It turned out it was just the auditions for the Gremlins voices. This may be Mandel telling a flop sweaty joke, because Film School Rejects does this great feature called Commentary, where they just like transcribe the best of audio commentaries for different movies. And for the Gremlins one, they talk about Howie Mandel does the Gizmo voice, of course, and spends like they say he spends half of it cracking jokes, about half of which land.
Oh.
Howie Mandel, who's a piece of loser doesn't sing Gizmo's iconic song. That was a 13-year-old from Jerry Goldsmith's Synagogue.
Why old do you hate Howie Mandel?
He sucks.
Oh, just, okay.
He's one of those like old comics who's like, you can't make my stuff today because of the PC. And he's on America's Got Talent. So like, fuck him. What do you mean? Why do I hate Howie Mandel? His face? His mien?
I knew his co-creator and co-writer on Bobby's World. He has a show on
iHeart,
Did he suck actually.
Too? Oh, Howie Mandel?
No. This other guy.
Oh.
He has a show with Jason Alexander called Really No Really.
Oh, yeah. All the voice actors had to redub their lines for the foreign releases of the film with local phrases and slang because they just really like made up the different sounds for them as they went. They were like, when the the gremlin goes like gizmo caca. That was just like something that they just ran with. But then they had to redub it in other languages, despite the fact they weren't speaking English in the first place. And this was a little bit of canny marketing on the part of Spielberg and Joe Dante, because when they were re-recording it, they threw in all kinds of little local nods to each locale that the film would be marketed in, and different pieces of slang in that language to make it land. For example, in Dory's Tavern, they've replaced all of the music and what the gremlins are singing with German drinking songs.
I like that.
Yeah, it's great. Good marketing, guys. Less interestingly, we can talk about the cast of Gremlins. I actually really like Zach Galligan. He plays Billy Peltzer. He's a sort of adorable every kid quality to him that's more endearing than your average Spielbergian child lead, most of whom I hate. And he would reprise the role in Gremlins 2. He was a child. He was 19 years old when he was cast. But he was originally meant to be 13, which is why his best friend in the film is a prepubescent Corey Feldman. He kept acting, but like has not done much other than the Gremlins films. Galligan was actually also almost beat out for the role by Emilio Estevez and Judd Nelson, who hilariously in the Blu-ray commentary, they say, displayed a bit too much anger in his audition. Judd Nelson, too angry for Gremlins. There were other...
Judd Hirsch, however.
The other casting calls for this read like the who's who of 80s male leads. Kevin Bacon, Rob Lowe, just too handsome, and also busy raping people at the time, right?
I didn't know that. Google's frantically.
Yeah, in 1988, his sex tape was with a 22-year-old woman and a 16-year-old.
Oh. I knew there was a sex tape. I didn't know the 16-year-old part.
So my mistake. He was not having sex with an underage woman when he was auditioning for Gremlins. TMI regrets the error.
The age of consent in Georgia at the time was 14. So
Christ. Oh my God, the South.
At the time that he was in Atlanta, Georgia for the Democratic National Convention where he was campaigning for Mike Dukakis.
Ralph Macchio also was like cast for this.
I can see that.
He would have been, yeah, he's great. He's a little too like, maybe just because I only think of him as the Karate Kid, but he's like, I can't really imagine him as like Jersey guy, you know? He just is forever in my head, like biking around to Bananarama and has like a doofy Jersey accent. I don't think I could buy him in like a wintry upstate setting. Galligan auditioned for Gremlins without really seeing the script or knowing that Spielberg was involved at all, but he got the part in 2 meetings. Our initial reaction was, he's another pretty boy, producer Michael Fennell told the Washington Post. But when he read, it was very touching. He had exactly the sort of ingenuousness we were looking for. On Galligan's second day, he did a screen test with Phoebe Cates, and the next day, both of them were offered the part. Supposedly, when Spielberg saw this test footage, he said, "Oh my God, look at that. He's in love with her already. I don't need to see anything else." And to add the final insult to injury, Phoebe Cates does not remember testing with Galligan.
Oh.
Ease of auditioning aside, being a 19-year-old in his first starring role meant Galligan was a little inexperienced. In the Blu-ray commentary, Dante recalled having to repeatedly tell him to shut his mouth when he wasn't speaking. The editor used to come up to me and say, "Can't you get him to keep his mouth closed? He's always got his mouth open and I gotta cut around it." Galligan blames this on a book about Montgomery Clift that he read. I'm not familiar enough with Montgomery Clift other than that he got his face smashed to know that he was gape-mouthed in scenes.
Oh, Elizabeth Taylor had to like pull his teeth out of his throat when...
I do remember that.
So
yeah.
maybe that was, I don't know. Maybe that was...
Teeth, mouth, face smash.
No bad ideas in brainstorming.
There's a Clash song about him, The Right Profile.
Really?
It's on, yeah, I think it's on London Calling.
I didn't know it was about him. Wow.
Galligan also recalls being blown away, hold for applause, by his first run-in with big screen pyrotechnics.
Like
the theater.
Hold for applause after, because nobody knows the joke until you have the pyrotechnics.
Don't tell me how to do this. Don't ever do that.
I'm not in front of the guests.
Jordan, may I see you in the kitchen?
I need help with the potatoes now.
For this theater explosion, he asked one of the crew how big the explosion would be. And the guy cryptically responded, "Well, we've packed it pretty good." It was deafening, Galligan told the Guardian. Just the ultimate, like, grizzled Teamster response. Just like, yeah, pretty well packed.
We packed it real good.
Galligan's like, what does that mean? It was deafening, he told the Guardian. And the heat was so intense, I thought it had singed my eyebrows. It blew the doors off the theater, as you can see in the film, and it shattered windows on a building at Universal a mile away.
Insert Michael Caine.
I was only supposed to blow the bloody doors off. That was terrible.
That was good.
Insert the actual clip.
Okay.
You're only supposed to blow the bloody doors off.
I have a hard time with Michael Caine. I can do the, like, Master Bruce.
Oh, you can do the broken voice.
Yeah, when it becomes very... And as he's gotten older, cigars and the brandy
whiskey
pulled his voice lower. Galligan also shares the screen very briefly with the legend of animation that Joe Dante snuck in as a tribute. Chuck Jones is the guy in the bar who's seen teaching Billy how to draw. That's the guy who created Marvin the Martian, Pepe Le Pew, and Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner.
That's nuts. Considering how wildly wholesome Phoebe Cates comes off in the film, it's weird to think that the studio initially balked at her casting because she was considered risque after doing her iconic pool exit in Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
She had another film where she was, like, way too young to be nude, right? Or was this after Ridgemont High?
There was something untoward that went on with her. I feel like it was like something like her dad signed her up for or something. Did she have some kind of like bohemian family that put her in like weird situations? I should probably stop before I get into a lawsuit.
Oh, no, it was her first film, the movie Paradise, in which she was 17 and she performed several full frontal and rear frontal, keeping that in, scenes as a minor. And she later regretted it.
Oh.
And then went and did Fast Times, which Rolling Stone has described as featuring the most memorable bikini drop in cinema history.
But she wound up with Kevin Kline, so a happy ending for Phoebe Cates. We love Kevin Kline, don't we?
We do.
We do, yeah. We surely do. Another Fast Times at Ridgemont High alum, Judge Reinhold, originally had a much larger role in Gremlins as Billy's nemesis, but his part was significantly cut down and many of his lines were given to Phoebe Cates, which I am fine with because I hate Judge Reinhold.
Like Howie Mandel.
Okay, you're right. We each get one. We each get one. That's my one.
Buddy, I don't have just one.
Phoebe Cates reveals in the Blu-ray I said the Blue Man commentary.
Yes.
Cates reveals in the Blu-ray commentary that her parents bought her a scooter to get around the Universal lot, but she crashed it too many times and they took it back from her. Was she that young that her parents could buy her a gift and then take it from her? How old was
yeah, she was, if she was 17 when she did the Gross film.
She was like 20.
No.
She was born in 1963.
Yeah, I guess it was shooting in 82, 83.
That's weird.
I mean, maybe they were like, you know, this is the money, Phoebe, gesturing to face. Don't f up the money.
I was rewatching O.J. Simpson Made in America, the 30 for 30 documentary, and one of his friends was talking about how, like, they would go to places and he'd be like, O.J., you don't have a ticket. And he'd be like, this is my ticket. And he would gesture to his face.
Jesus.
I was just watching that this afternoon.
Classic murderer.
Great. You know, he went to Nicole's funeral. It's not wild.
Fucking balls on him.
Yeah. Phoebe Cates and Zach Galligan got to be good friends, which I'm sure devastated Galligan, to the point where she said kissing him felt like kissing her brother. Oh, God. Poor guy.
She just keeps murdering him. Interview after interview.
This is terrible. And this was complicated further by Spielberg's insistence that Gizmo be included in the kissing shot.
I love that so much. Spielberg shows up for like one of his 2 days on set.
And with a cap that has the name of the film on it.
Yes, classic Spielberg. And it's like, you know, poor Zach Galligan is having his like first on-screen kiss with like the impossibly beautiful Phoebe Cates, and Steven Spielberg is just like off camera, slowly shoving a Gizmo puppet between them.
Did Spielberg also... Like the one of the scenes that he supposedly ghost directed in Goonies was Sean Astin character's Mikey's kiss with Andy, like the cheerleader girl or something, and it was all like in silhouette, and it was very cartoonish, like it looked like a Disney thing about the wishing well.
Yeah, having a quasi fixation on like teenage first kiss moments is probably very Spielberg.
You know, describing that, I thought it was wholesome, and then hearing you describe it like that really took something from me.
Oh, you're welcome.
Kate's famous monologue about her father's death sounds like an urban legend, but the legend itself may have been based on a famous Playboy cartoon, which was screenwriter Chris Columbus's inspiration when he was writing the script.
Do you know about this?
No, I have no idea what you're talking about.
I knew this urban legend that ostensibly takes place, but I had no idea about the origins of it.
Well, here, you take this then. I don't know this at all.
Yeah, so this was a 1964 cartoon by...
Well, remind me what her monologue is.
She talks about finding her dad dead dressed as Santa in the chimney. Gahan Williams? I don't know how to pronounce his name. So this was a cartoon in Playboy, as I mentioned, and it depicts a chimney worker telling a couple, well, we found out what's been clogging your chimney since last December, and it includes an illustration of Santa as a skeleton in a red suit. Wilson told the Washington Post he received more angry mail over that than anything I ever did. You can mess around with religion, but when you kill off Santa Claus, there's an uproar.
Kate's, meanwhile, took the speech very seriously, despite its kind of ridiculous origin. Zach Galligan told Yahoo News she would rehearse it every day. She'd say, what about this way? What about that way? We probably rehearsed it 100, 150 times. So by the time we got there, she absolutely nailed it and did a phenomenal job. He still sounds down bad.
Yeah. Wouldn't you be?
Well, sure.
Come on, dude.
Joe Dante was also quick to praise Phoebe in the Blu-ray commentary. He said, we worked so hard on this scene and tried to make it just the right touch of pathos and goofiness, and I was really happy with it and thought this really encapsulates the tone of this movie for me. On the way back to the editing room, the editor turned to me and said, this will never be in the picture. And it became my quest to make sure it stayed in the picture. But both Spielberg and the studio balked at it. Galligan continued, the studio was like, what is this? Some people were like, is this real? Is this a joke? Is this supposed to be funny? So we had to go and tell Phoebe that they were going to cut the scene. She was not happy about that, and Joe was not happy about that. And basically, we had final cut, and when it came time to leave in or take it out, we just decided, you know what? I'm making an executive decision and leaving it in. Spielberg, perhaps still feeling stung by the ghost directing controversy around Poltergeist, pun, ultimately backed Joe Dante with the studio against his own desires, and the rest is history, and the scene stayed in the picture. The scene stayed in the picture. The scene stays in the picture. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
In Roger Ebert's review of the scene...
Sorry.
In Roger Ebert's review of the film, he praised the scene being in the tradition of sick 1950s jokes. That's a very interesting, very specific phenomenon that I never really thought of as a trope, but I guess it kind of is.
Ebert rarely missed.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment.
The rest of the cast of Gremlins is filled out, aside from a pre-fame Corey Feldman, who had yet to star in the Friday the 13th film that semi-launched him, by veteran character actors. Edward Andrews plays the senior bank nemesis of Billy's. This was actually his last role, but he managed to notch another iconic 80s film into his CV. He played Molly Ringwald's dad in 16 Candles, which came out the same year as Gremlins.
Oh.
Imagine, those two films being your last. Two of the most iconic films of the 80s. Eventual Emmy winner Glyn Turman plays the ill-fated science teacher initially studying the Mogwai. And he was famous for his role in the original Broadway production of A Raisin in the Sun as a child actor. He was on the Cosby Show spinoff A Different World, and I know him best as the mayor in The Wire. Kie Luke, who played the Mogwai's original owner, apparently had such good skin at the age of 80 that they had to age him up to play his character, Galligan recalled. He asked him, he was like, man, what is it? And the guy was like, no fried foods. So... little tip for you there. But Luke had an incredibly long history in Hollywood. He was known for playing Lee Chan, the #1 son in the outrageously racist Charlie Chan films. He was the original Kato in the 1939 to 1941 Green Hornet serials. He played Master Po in Kung Fu, and most incredibly, he played friggin' Brack in the original Space Ghost cartoons.
No way.
Polly Dean Holiday played the venomous Mrs. Deagle.
The venomous Mrs. Deagle. That's a great collection of words, like the fantastic Mrs. Maisel.
But she's more likely remembered as Flo from the 1970s sitcoms Alice and her own sitcom, Flo. She was the Kiss My Grits lady.
Oh, yeah.
And it is a clever bit of screenwriting that her cats in the film, and Mrs. Deagle is the richest woman in film, all of her cats are named after different kinds of currency. Kopek, ruble, peso, drachma, and dollar bill.
That's a good bit. I like that a lot. That's good.
Dude, when seeing all the details from this film stacked up against each other, it is honestly insane.
And it was great. It was Chris Columbus's first script. Or, well, okay, first, like,
between him, Spielberg, and Joe Dante, just like, this thing is like a walking encyclopedia of like mid-century American fiction. Dick Miller plays Mr. Futterman, the grizzled everyman vet who relays the aviation origin of the Gremlins. Dick Miller is one of those guys who you will absolutely look at and go, that guy.
Yes.
He was one of Roger Corman's stock players and later Dante's. He is known for playing grizzled everyman, and this is most funny. As a sort of industry in-joke, he was frequently cast as Walter Paisley. Now, this was a reference to his starring role in Roger Corman's early cult flick, A Bucket of Blood, but bafflingly, he would continue to be cast as Walter Paisley, even though he wasn't playing that character. This includes the Twilight Zone movie and the 80s killer robot gem Chopping Mall.
That's great. He was also in my beloved Explorers, that movie with a young Ethan Hawke, young River Phoenix. I forget there was somebody else in it too. The movie where they turn a tilt-a-whirl into a spacecraft. It's a good movie. It's from like 1986. Yeah. It's an awesome movie.
And lastly, Hoyt Axton, who plays Billy's failure of an inventor dad, was far more known as a musician. He also apparently ad-libbed like 90% of this film. His mom co-wrote Heartbreak Hotel.
Yeah, wait, Hoyt Axton, wasn't he a songwriter too? He wrote like Joy to the World. He wrote, oh my God, yeah.
He wrote Joy to the World, popularized by Three Dog Night, and The Pusher, recorded by Steppenwolf for the Easy Rider soundtrack.
Yeah.
And he was Dante's first choice for this role after seeing him in The Black Stallion, with sound design notably by Alan Splett. I guess Joe Dante took one of the inventions, the Peltzer peeler juicer, and it is still for sale online, but it is like so filled with NFT jargon that I think it may actually be a parody. Like you could Google Joe Dante Peltzer peeler juicer and it'll take you to an ostensible sale page, but it is so like jammed with cryptocurrency and NFT shit that I almost, it has to be like a bit. I don't know where else to put this, but our man Jerry Goldsmith turned in the score for Gremlins.
What else did he do? Air Force One? What else did he do?
Didn't he just do Planet of the Apes like 2 weeks ago?
And he did Air Force One in like 6 days or something crazy?
Star Trek, yeah, he's a true, and sneakily avant-garde too. Like I remember when we talked about Planet of the Apes, you know, he was doing all these weird ethnic percussion things treated with a bunch of echo. And first of all, he turns in 2 bangers. There's the Gremlin Rag, which I think you should pump in here. And then there's Gizmo's Lullaby, which is great, just super cute, and the one that was sung by a kid from his synagogue. I couldn't find much about this score in Goldsmith's own words, but I did find a UK sheet music publisher that had this to say about the film. Incorporating a total of 8 synthesizers, a drum machine, and a digital polyphonic sequencer, the Gremlins score reads like a who's who of classic 80s synths. Roland's Jupiter 6, notably providing the cat's meow sound heard prominently when the Gremlins turn evil, Sequential Circuit's Prophet T8, a Rhodes Chroma, Yamaha's GS1, Moog's Memory Moog, a pair of Yamaha's ubiquitous DX7s, and an Oberheim trio, the OB8 synth, DSX sequencer, and DMX drum machines.
Is that what Kate Bush used to record Hounds of Love on?
Yeah, the Oberheim is it's probably the second most famous 80s drum machine from the after the Lynn drum. And it is where DMX got his name.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, a lot of his early beats were done with an Oberheim, and he took DMX from it, and I think later reverse engineered it into Darkman X. God, I love DMX. Anyway, rather than being pre-recorded or fed directly into the mixing desk, this site claims that these synths were amplified and played live with the 80-piece orchestra that Goldsmith was conducting. That's cool. And this was his second reteam with Spielberg and Dante. He did the score to both Poltergeist and the Twilight Zone movie. Poltergeist also has an iconic, creepy children's theme sung by a child as well, if memory serves. Poltergeist must have terrified you the first time you saw it. Have you even seen it?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
A long time ago.
I figured you may have for Spielberg, but is not an appropriate film for children, as we'll cover. La, la. Yeah, that's what this. La, 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 la. What's with Goldsmith and creepy kids?
Well, and then I think I watched it after I heard that there was like a poltergeist curse with the little girl died and Dominique Dunn, was she in that?
Yep.
Yeah, she died too. Dominic Dunn's daughter, who was strangled by her ex-boyfriend, or maybe current boyfriend. I don't know.
Who's to say?
Dominic Dunn. Man, his like compendium of reporting for different high-profile trials.
I know you're obsessed with him for his like both his writing and his pay.
Oh yeah, he had some contract where he would get like 150 grand for Vanity Fair to write like 3 2,000-word articles a year,
and then like an outrageous bonus per word
if he went over. That. Yeah. Meanwhile, I've written that in the past 5 days.
Yeah, I used to write 2,000 words a day at page 6 sometimes.
I turned in a 4,000-word article in the Beatles today that I wrote this morning.
What have we done to this world? Remember when artists were like considered artists and not just like annoying roadblocks in the path to content?
I mean, I don't remember it firsthand, sadly.
No, just
reading about it when we were kids.
Yeah, reading about it and being told that one day I could possibly inhabit that world.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead. Spiraling.
Though Gremlins was initially scheduled for a Christmas release, it came out on July 6th, 1984, because America. That was the same date as Ghostbusters was dropped. Damn. It was rushed out because Warner Brothers apparently found out that they had nothing going against Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom or Columbia's Ghostbusters.
It is amazing that Spielberg was quite literally pitting two of the big four, however many biggest movie studios against each other.
I'm surprised they wanted to compete. Why wouldn't you just let the other studios have that and then, okay.
Because they're really mean-spirited about it. I think the idea is
true.
to not let anyone have an exclusive hold on a particular date.
Okay, fair. Unfortunately, this was a bad choice for Universal. Everywhere except New York City, who I guess denizens of New York are used to seeing little creatures scurrying around everywhere when they're out and about. So maybe that's why.
Nope, just read the next sentence.
Oh, okay. Joe Dante told Empire magazine, Ghostbusters routinely beat us in terms of money everywhere but New York City. Because while shooting there, they pissed off so many New Yorkers that they decided not to see it. And for some reason, Gremlins was huge there.
Greatest city in the world, baby. Let's go Mets, bing bong.
I remember my first semester, my freshman year at NYU, they were filming the Will Smith movie I Am Legend in Washington Square, which was like the park that we had to walk through to get to class every day. And every day people would be late to class because it was like, sorry, they just blew up a car in the middle of the park. And I saw like, sorry, everybody. So yeah, by the time it was released in theaters too, we all had kind of a grudge against I Am Legend too. So I kind of get it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, Steven Spielberg sent Joe Dante, producer Mike Finnell, and Chris Columbus, and the film's editor to Hawaii as a present, presumably after the movie was done. And when they checked into their hotel, they bumped into Evan Reitman and the Ghostbusters guys, who were on their own celebratory vacation.
That is so f***ing funny to me. Like, imagine being the other sci-fi fantasy crew, and you're just pummeled by Ghostbusters, and you show up on your Spielberg-sponsored vacation, and they're at the same hotel as you. That's f***ing forgetting Sarah Marshall. Like, come on.
Well, and also, I mean, another Chris Columbus movie, The Goonies, director Richard Donner finally gets away from these little bastard kids and goes
and
home to Hawaii.
Spielberg also shipped them to Hawaii to vex him further.
Well, Spielberg loves sending people to Hawaii, I guess.
Oh man, he's the best.
Yeah, I didn't think I'd come away from this liking Spielberg as much as I do right now. Unfortunately, the studio battled director Joe Dante and Spielberg all the way up to the release. One of their notes was that there were too many gremlins in it, to which Spielberg supposedly quipped, "Shall we cut them out and call it people instead?"
One of the all-time studio comebacks. I just love the fact he had such big dick energy. He was just rolling around telling different studios, again, two of the biggest, to just f themselves. Like, I'm Steven f***ing Spielberg. How dare you speak to me like that?
I mean...
and he was right to do it.
Yeah. Hence, the expectations around Gremlins were not high, which made it all the more incredible when it became a runaway hit, eventually grossing over $148 million during its initial run worldwide on a budget of $11 million. I had no idea it was that big of a hit.
Oh, yeah.
This is such a blind spot for me. Like, I really don't know.
I really, like, not that I'm telling you to watch, like, 4 hours of Gremlin stuff, but you should really watch both of them.
Well, no. I mean, I've done worse to you.
I mean, they're just so fascinating. This one, because it's so mean and so, like, really wildly out of pocket for what would be a children's film. And then the second one for how batshit it is, which I would joyfully talk about later.
Okay. Gremlins also wound up the 4th highest grossing film of 1984 behind Beverly Hills Cop, Ghostbusters, and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. That's posting some serious numbers. Wow.
Yeah, dude.
Gremlins is also lodged in film history for being directly responsible, along with the Temple of Doom and Jaws, for the PG-13 rating, which you write is kind of funny that Spielberg has this reputation as a sentimental family filmmaker, while he made 3 films way too violent for kids, 4 if you count Poltergeist, which incredibly also came out with a PG rating. Poltergeist was 3D.
It's a scene where a man peels his own face off.
Oh, what?
The look on your face right now. You forgot about that scene?
No, I remember it. I just can't believe it was PG.
Oh yeah, and it's so funny that you like it was just Steven Spielberg. I mean, surely other films, but like these are the ones that I always hear mentioned: Jaws, Temple of Doom, Gremlins, and Poltergeist.
I like almost don't believe you. Like I. Director Joe Dante later told The Guardian, at the premiere, after the scene where one gremlin explodes in a microwave, a mother watching with her kid came storming up and shouted at me that it was totally unsuitable for children. Spielberg had, in fact, argued the MPAA down from an R to a PG, but the combined reactions to Gremlins and the Temple of Doom, building on Poltergeist, forced him into a conflict with the MPAA, Motion Picture Association of America. Yes.
Yeah, now just shortened to MPA. And famously, their rating, you know, I think we've covered this before, but their ratings process is 100% opaque and largely dictated by the personal grievances of whoever's running the organization at any given moment. There's all kinds of talks about different people going back for like edits from like literally cutting out like a frame or a second or too many like thrusts during a sex scene. And there's one that I think like, I forget which film is it, but they like literally lied to the MPAA and were like, yeah, we cut it again. And it was accepted but they hadn't made any cuts. So it's a stupid system and organization. And for a while, it was really like they could make or break a film. Like if something came out with an R or God forbid an X when that was still kind of a thing, like you were f***ed, basically.
Yeah, I know some people who work in standards and practices, and it's pretty arbitrary. Wasn't there, I forget if it was an MPAA thing or just like a network TV thing where people would intentionally write things into scripts knowing that they were going to be...
Oh, to see if they were reading?
Well, no, not only see if they were reading, but also, oh yeah, it was Good Will Hunting. They put in the sacrificial, like, okay, we'll cut this.
Yeah,
if you
like smokes, like a false flag operation.
Yes. Like, okay, we'll lose this, but you have to let us keep this. And yeah. Oh yeah, that was Good Will Hunting, where they wrote in a sex scene between Will and the Robin Williams character just to see if any of the executives were paying attention. And that was why they went with Weinstein. Because he always paid attention to the sex scenes.
Hey-o!
Spielberg later spoke of his conflict with the MPAA to Vanity Fair. He said, I had come under criticism, personal criticism, for both Temple of Doom and Gremlins that same year. I remember calling Jack Valenti, who was then the president of the Motion Picture Association, and suggesting to him that we need a rating between R and PG, because so many films were falling into a netherworld. of unfairness.
I love that Vanity Fair refused to do the pretty standard practice of removing, and other verbal tics.
Unfair that certain kids were exposed to Jaws, but also unfair that certain films were restricted, that kids who are 13, 14, 15 should be allowed to see. I suggested, let's call it PG-13 or PG-14, depending on how you want to design the slide rule. And Jack Valenti, the aforementioned president of the MPAA, came back to me and said, we've determined that PG-13 would be the right age for that temperature of movie. The first film that came out designated as such would be Red Dawn. I'm not sure if I'm familiar.
That's the movie where the kids form an anti-communist militia in their hometown. Wolverines!
Oh, with Swayze? Isn't Swayze in that?
Yeah, it's like another Brat Pack movie. What's really funny about Gremlins specifically is that even after they instituted this rating, Prince continued to go out rated PG. So even after they created a new interim rating, retroactively deciding that this movie was not appropriate for children, it continued to be distributed with a PG rating. Hollywood.
Wait, Red Dawn also has C. Thomas Howell, who, why do I know him?
He's the blackface guy who started Soul Man.
Yes, thank you. Okay.
For which Lou Reed did a cover of Soul Man, if memory serves. Gremlins was basically a license to print money with creatures both cute and gruesome to adapt into toys. Joe Dante told Empire, I remember the day we watched dailies of Gizmo coming out of his box for the first time. These hardened Warner's executives started going, ooh. In the back of my head, I could hear cash register noises. They instantly put their merchandising staff into high gear, board games and color forms and clothing and bed sheets. And it's easy to forget now, but merch tie-ins with movies weren't as much of a thing until Spielberg with Jaws and George Lucas with Star Wars. This trend peaked with E.T. and had actually dipped for a little while until Gremlins. And naturally, Gizmo was the star, various stuffed versions of him becoming one of the defining toys in the 1980s. But everything from trading cards to video games were lent the Gremlins name, and not even the foodstuffs were safe. The film had a tie-in with Hardee's, wherein the fast food chain released 5 storybooks and record sets that told the story of the film, manufactured and distributed by Disney. There was also Gremlins cereal as well, although they really whiffed it by not calling it Gizmos. Hold for applause. Manufactured by Ralston, the geniuses who also brought us Nintendo Cereal System and Bill & Ted's Excellent Cereal. I am not making that up. Dante and Gilligan both panned the cereal in their Empire review, with the director describing it as just awful, like peanut butter gone wrong. Unsurprisingly, Warner Brothers wanted a sequel to Gremlins immediately, and I do mean immediately. Joe Dante says they asked him the weekend after the film opened to get started on a sequel.
That sounds about right.
But he felt he needed a rest. And also unsurprisingly, Warner's immediately began cycling through other writers and directors for pitches that Dante would recall included Gremlins Go to Las Vegas and Gremlins Go to Mars.
Wait, did the studio pitch him on those, or did he
No, they were
pitch
just
that?
bringing in anyone who had an idea for Gremlins.
Okay, I see.
And this went on for 2 or 3 years, and then they eventually went hat in hand to both Dante and his producer, Mike Fennell, and just said, will you come back? Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Joe Dante ran into Terry Semel on the Warner Brothers lot, who was then head of the studio. Mike Farrell told Consequence of Sound for their amazing Gremlins 2 oral history. And Terry said, look, this is the cigar jumping executive part. Look, we need Gremlins 2. We have to have Gremlins 2. You can do anything you want. I don't care about the script. I don't care about the story. It just has to be called Gremlins 2 and have Gremlins in it. Anything else is your call. That is the quote. I put it in a different voice. The film started shooting in 1989 because of this protracted process 5 years after the first one. That is insane to me, man. Like, they should have just canned it. I'm sorry, but then we wouldn't have had Gremlins 2, the new batch, which is, as I mentioned up top, possibly the defining blank check you film. Once again, Dante agreed to do this because he had complete creative control. That's what they promised him, and with this enhanced budget, he went apeshit. Gilligan and Cates both return, but Chris Walas understandably declined, and they brought in probably the only person better than him, Rick Baker.
Of The Thing and something more recently.
That was Rob Bottin. Rick Baker sorry.
Wait, we just had him on something.
Well, he apprenticed on Star Wars. Planet of the Apes. He did the 2001. Yeah, and they went with the only person probably more suited by a hair than Chris Walas, which would be Rick fucking Baker, who won the Academy Award for Best Makeup 7 times from 11 nominations. He's famous for assisting veteran Dick Smith on The Exorcist. He won for American Werewolf in London. He turned Michael Jackson into a werecat for Thriller. Men in Black. And so with this expanded budget, and once again, I have to stress, no creative oversight, the two of them just turned in this incredible... Again, dude, you just have to see it for how insane it is. I'll describe it to you, and that will not get close. The film is set in a thinly veiled Trump Tower, Billy and Kate having moved to New York City to make it, with character actor John Glover playing the namesake blustery tycoon, who's a thinly veiled analog for Trump. And that is it as far as plot goes. There's a Gremlins outbreak, and then it is just an escalating series of sight gags and crazier Gremlin stuff. I think Baker and Dante knew that they would never have this opportunity again, and they went balls to the wall. Baker didn't want to redo Chris Walas's work from the original film, so they came up with the idea of having a genetics testing lab as part of this tower, and it is run by Christopher Lee in an amazing cameo. There's a great part where the secretary coughs into a tissue in front of him, and he removes the tissue from her hand and puts it in a bag to take back to the lab. And this conceit of having this, the concept of having this genetics lab came up with the opportunity for them to just say, anybody have an idea for a gremlin? We're going to do it. This includes a bat gremlin, which at one point escapes and leaves a hole in the wall, the exact shape of the Batman symbol, and then is covered in cement and freezes into a gargoyle on, I think, St. Patrick's Cathedral. There's also a sexy lady gremlin, a brain gremlin, voiced by Tony Randall, a spider gremlin, a salad gremlin, and an electric gremlin that is trapped in the phone system. And I might even be forgetting some.
A salad gremlin.
Yeah, he pops out of a salad bar and he's all made of radishes and carrots and stuff. This is all parodied in an amazing Key and Peele sketch where they have this completely fake movie consultant come into a board meeting and get everyone to pitch their dumb ideas for Gremlins. And then it ends with another exec coming in and saying, you guys, none of this will be in the movie. And then it smash cuts to a card saying all of this is in Gremlins 2. Which you should also look up. It's Jordan Peele's hilarious in it. The Brain Goblin, again voiced by Tony Randall, the movie is in that beautiful period where the technology for practicals was as good as it would ever get, and before it was starting to be replaced by CGI. They recorded Randall's dialogue far in advance, and because they had to feed it into a computer, which was plugged into this device called a Gilderfluke, which is just the name of the company. But what this thing did was map the animatronics movement to the dialogue via computer so they didn't have to control it by hand. And that was how they get this thing to match Tony Randall's incredible dialogue. And this is all even aside the litany of insane cameos and references that are in this film, because the other thing is they weren't just content to make an SFX showcase. They were also we have to make something that just puts its thumb in the eye of Hollywood as an idea, and also corporate greed. So the whole thing opens with a Chuck Jones Looney Tunes animated segment, just apropos of nothing. They have a guy playing essentially Al Lewis as Grandpa Munster. Leonard Maltin plays himself and is mauled by some gremlins. Hulk Hogan makes a cameo. Gizmo cosplays as Rambo, and Sylvester Stallone actually gave him their blessing for this. Julius Sweeney plays the receptionist. And the film also takes time to riff on the absurdity of the Mogwai rules. There's a whole scene where people are like, well, what happens if he's on a plane that crosses time zones and it's after midnight that way? I mean, it's always midnight somewhere, right? That is they just take a minute to have a bunch of guys sitting around and riff on how dumb the rules are. And the whole thing concludes with a musical number where the Tony Randall gremlin sings New York, New York. There's also I forgot to mention the fourth wall break. There's an extended fourth wall break where the gremlins sabotage the projection reel. and they like tear apart the reel, and there's like all these blots and burns, and then they cut a separate version of this. This is the level of detail in this is so insane. Because the projection gag wouldn't work on home video, they cut a separate scene where it looked like your VHS and VCR were glitching out with a separate John Wayne bit, which they had to reach out to Wayne's estate to approve. Also, the musical number, the New York, New York, is a reference to a Busby Berkeley number in Dames, a Warner Brothers musical from the 1930s. Again, deep cut. And Dante, in his infinite genius, wanted to ship little cardboard gremlin cutouts to movie theaters so that when this fourth wall break happens and it looks like the projection is breaking down, audiences would turn around and look at the booth and see these little cardboard cutouts cavorting around in silhouette. This was like his idea.
Castle thing.
Yeah, he was trying to do a William Castle thing. And they were wisely like, no, dude. Like, are you fucking kidding? Insane film.
I'm just on Joe Dante's Wikipedia page, and his list of unrealized projects is pretty insane.
Because of this. This film ultimately came out in 1990, and it had the multiple catastrophes of Warner Brothers shuffling around its release date. They were originally going to put it out Memorial Day, and then they moved it to compete with Warren Beatty's Dick Tracy remake from Disney. And also, it was released 6 years after the first one, which may be past the statute of limitations for a sequel. The film was a flop, perhaps needless to say, but it has become an enormous cult hit, which I urge everyone to seek out. There's been a talk of a Gremlins 3 since like forever, but the closest we've actually come is a recent HBO animated series called Gremlins, Secrets of the Mogwai, which came out last year.
What was the budget for Gremlins 2? Between 30 and 50 million? And it only made a 41.5. Oh.
Yeah, so roughly 3 to 5 times the budget of the original and made a third. Oh, man. What a perfect movie. It's so good.
I love how much you love this.
You have to, I would actually tell you,
Should I watch 2 first?
See, I don't know, man. Yeah, you could, if you only have time for 1. 2 is not as good of a movie, but it is a more entertaining movie because it's so much goofier and cartoony. Like the first one is kind of scary and mean in parts. And the second one is just like, we're going to do Looney Tunes with our weird little guys from 6 years earlier. Just incredible stuff. I'm still thinking about it. I'm always thinking about it, to be honest. Whew. All right. Folks, if I can get serious for a moment. Writing in Vulture in 2013, Anthony Scabelli posited Gremlin's moral, spelled out by Key Luke's wizened old man, is that Billy, and perhaps American culture as a whole, cannot take something sweet and pure, like a Mogwai, without transforming it, even if just inadvertently, into a gremlin. When he's given It's a Wonderful Life, Dante must transform it into Invasion of the Body Snatchers. End quote. Joyfully anarchic, but somehow still lovable, the Mogwai and the Gremlins represent the best and worst in not just America, but everyone. We're all just a few errant drops of water away from reverting to our basest selves, and the wonderful tension of life rides on the razor's edge between those two halves. Folks, thank you for listening. This has been Too Much Information. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh. We'll catch you next time.
Too Much Information was a production of iHeart Radio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The show's supervising producer is Michael Alder June.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
With original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeart Radio, visit the iHeart Radio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.